Now we come to the Les Sayre Memorial Lecture, the final lecture for our event here today. And to introduce this and to say a little bit about Les, I'd like to introduce you to Roger Hum. I've known Roger for a vast number of years now, it seems. We were both laughing but silently crying inside at the picture of us both outside showing how young we once were. Roger founded this society over 30 years ago, and for at least half of the time in between he's been a committee member. He's utterly committed to this society and to the observatory that is on the grounds of where Les Sayre used to live. So without further ado, let's ask Roger to come and tell you a little bit more about the man who was Les Sayre.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Nice to see so many people here today. Les would have loved to have been here, I'm sure. Les was our president for 20 years, up until his death 4 years ago. Now, I first met Les in 1989. He was already into his 70s, a decorated war hero, and somebody that really didn't need to do anything else, to be honest. I want to split this into two little sections. First of all, I want to tell you a little bit about Les and what he did during the war. He was a Barnardo's boy, brought up in a Barnardo's home, and joined the Navy at the age of about 14, and went through Shotley, which a lot of you know in this part of the world. And skipping through to the Second World War, he flew in one of these from various aircraft carriers during the Second World War. And in 1941, this country was in desperate peril. We were on our own, and the Bismarck broke loose into the Atlantic Ocean. Les was on board HMS Victorious with his string bag, as they were called, and frankly, it looked disastrous. They sunk the hood. The King George was running out of fuel, and we literally couldn't find the Bismarck. And eventually, an American Coast Guard cutter, what it was doing on the east coast of Africa, no one seems to know, but it found the Bismarck and radioed in, and Victorious at the time was the last hope. Les took off for a 3-hour flight in rough weather across the Atlantic, found the Bismarck, and the squadron proceeded to attack. As they attacked, they went in at very low level, hoping that the Germans wouldn't see them, at about 60 feet off the waves. First attack went in, and Les's plane had to go round again, because it literally was coming in, he thought, at the wrong angle. So he went out 25, 30 miles and came in on his own against the Bismarck. And as he flew in, the Bismarck was launching 18-inch shells, and they were landing in front and throwing 120-foot columns of water, which he had to go round. At one stage, at the beginning of that run-in, one shell landed underneath the aircraft, went up and tore all the bottom out of the Swordfish, and he was sitting there with a torpedo between his legs, literally. And he dropped his torpedo, it hit the rudder, and the Bismarck was forced into going around in circles. Now, there's 2 points from this. This is just one incident, a very important incident from the Second World War, and I'll come on to a second incident. Looking at it purely from the fate, for personal reasons, for everybody sitting here, if he hadn't have dropped that torpedo that hit the rudder at the Bismarck, it would have got back into Brest. The whole shape of the Second World War would have changed, because our fleet were not going to catch it, and it would still have been there, very much a menace into the Atlantic, and kept our fleet bottled up. So that's the first part of the story. I now jump forward, I should say, to an event, I don't know if anybody's heard of it, the Channel Dash. Now, this was 1942, and the Americans had just come into the war, and the Germans had got bottled up in Brest, the Gneisenau, the Prince Eugen, and a fleet of ships. And the Germans wanted to break through to get up to the Norwegian fjords so they could tack into the Atlantic far easier. So they decided to do it. They didn't send out any radio signals or whatever, and they proceeded on one specific day at dawn, in the evening, twilight, to go through and get through as quickly as possible before we could attack them with aircraft. Now, I'm going to jump here because Les, in 825 Squadron, at that particular time was based at Manston, where 825 Squadron would be the squadron to attempt to stop the NEAS now and the Prince Eugen. That evening, Les's best friend, Clint Clinton, and him had a chat. Les's wife was in Scotland, in Arbroath. Clint's wife was down in London, and he wanted to swap duties, so they swapped duties. And Les went off to Arbroath that night. Clint stayed in Manston, and that night they found the Prince Eugen and Gneisenau going through, and that squadron didn't have hardly any survivors, including his best mate, which was the one he swapped duties with. So there's two things here, really. If you look at fate, none of us would be sitting here today if it had got back into Brest, the Bismarck. And if Les hadn't swapped duties, we certainly wouldn't have been here, because without that man there, this society wouldn't exist in the form it does today. That's a simple fact of life. That's one side of the story. The second side of the story, this is where Les and his wife Val, by the way, is our patron now, since Les died, and things are continuing the same way. This observatory was built by Charles Munday, who was a scientist engineer who still has many patents in use today all over the world. And he built this in conjunction with NASA. And as you can see, it's just a brick building with a dome, literally just room to go inside. And it took him 3 years to build with his own hands. And he died 3 months before Halley's Comet arrived, which he had built it for, to look at. So he died, the house was sold. Les and Val bought it. And they hadn't been there more than about a year. And they heard on the radio a small society, astronomical society in Essex, wanted a little piece of land to put a hut on or whatever to store a telescope so they could come out in dark skies and look through it. So Les and Val rang us up and said, "We've heard your advert, come down and have a talk to us." So we went down and met Les and Val, and we got on famously. And the result of that is what you see there. It looks a bit dirty, but that's because the cows keep walking around and rubbing against it, by the way. And it now is not just a dome. It's got kitchen facilities, it's got toilet facilities, it's got a clubhouse, it's computerized. Oh, God. I love the Stuart, I love it. That was 2000, and that's when Stuart came along as our vice president to inaugurate the new observatory. And at that time, we had around 30 members, and it's now in 3 figures and rising all the time. So we've got a lot to be thankful for Les. He was a wonderful, wonderful, wonderful man. And every time that we needed to build an extension or improve the observatory, we'd suddenly turn up and find it all been paid for, the goods were there, just get on with it and do it. And the money that he put into it, along with his wife Val, must have come into thousands and thousands of pounds. And it's still happening. I went to the observatory on Thursday night, and we said a few months ago that what we'd like is a storage area to keep telescopes and various things for functions that we have at the observatory. Turned up at Thursday night, the extension's been built, it's all done with padlock, tiled roof, everything. What it cost, I wouldn't like to say, but we haven't had a bill yet. So I've got to say thanks very much to Les and to his wife Val, and we remember him very, very well, and this lecture is in his memory. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Roger.